Now, so the other story driving the day, which is on page 2 of the Mirror, where Rishi Sunak gave a big interview yesterday to the BBC, and we've got a little clip of it. Here you go.
Have to make difficult decisions as Prime Minister. Everyone can see the context that we're in with inflation and interest rates. Now, I want to prioritise the things that are right for the country. So yes, we're investing in the long-term workforce plan. When it comes to public sector pay, I'm going to do what I think is affordable, what I think is responsible. Now, that may not always be popular in the short term, but it is the right thing for the country.
Now, there's 2 points here, Sophie. Right. So first off, this is a man who thinks taking a helicopter 40 miles is affordable and responsible. So presumably that means everyone in the NHS is getting a Sikorsky for Christmas. Secondly, he doesn't have anything except the short term to play with, does he? To make these decisions, what was that? He has not got the long term to talk about, does he?
No, well, this is this divergent tactic that we've seen from Rishi Sunak over and over again, where he claims that he's in touch with the people by just saying, this is really tough. I really get this. I went to his speech last week. He did a new IKEA distribution centre in Dartford, and he's there with loads of workers, and you could just see the looks on their faces, just him absolutely not getting it. He was just saying, I know this has never been easy. I know it's going to be tough. And they're looking and say, but you don't, do you? Because if that's your one line, it clearly shows that you're not properly engaging with the issues. Like you say, a general election will come soon enough. Clearly, he's just like buying time. It's almost this robotic speech of, I get it, don't worry, I'll sort it out. But who knows when's that going to be, He's made these pledges to cut NHS waiting times, to halve inflation, to bring down debt, Over the time since he has made those pledges, they've all got worse. Inflation's got worse. NHS waiting lists have hit a new record. Clearly, this isn't going very well for him. So all he can do is, in the future that none of us know about, potentially a solution.
In the future where he is not going to be Prime Minister. So it's kind of irrelevant. Now, Mike says 6 months after launching his 5 pledges with inflation, waiting list, debt and boat crossings all at record highs, the government actually planning a recession, is Rishi going to have to find 5 different pledges for the second half of the year? I did say, Mike, when they brought out those pledges that they sounded like they should have been carved on a gravestone and done at some kind of press launch like Ed Miliband's Ed Stone was. And Kevin Maguire, in his column today in the paper, is pointing out that although 5 of those big promises, inflation is stuck at 8.7%, the boats are increasing, not stopping because it's summer, economy is stagnating, NHS waiting lists are higher, and national debt is as bad, it's actually worse than it's ever been, really, since 1961. We're at 100% of GDP as national debt. And so all those things that he's pledged, Soph, are... I mean, how is he going to say, yes, I know. Well, they're still my aim. They're still my ambition. I do know that they are not where they should be. How's that going to... How is any of this going to help him?
I think it's this thing that he's almost trying to bring out this sense of personality, that he gets it, that he is sympathetic. He said with these pledges, that they are personal pledges for him. Why would he have made those pledges if he couldn't keep to them? And he sort of says these lines, and it's like, well, actually, let's just look at all the evidence that's going on. Let's look at the cost of living crisis. Let's look at people's living standards. Let's look at the amount of time people are having to wait to still get NHS treatment, with the list, the waiting list hitting 7.4 million for the first time this month. He seems to be sort of losing grip on reality of British people in this country, and I feel like that's part of him. He's a maths whiz. He's a banker. He's got a very financial brain, and he's kind of got those that he tries to use facts in this weird sort of way that actually just omits lots of other things of people's lived experience.
Like Deborah says there, he doesn't have that lived experience, does he? She says he doesn't have to. When did he ever go to a food bank? He's talking to us without ever having any experience of what happened. I don't know how he got to Dartford, but when he went to Dover the other day, he went by a helicopter, which shaved about 5 minutes off the journey time if he'd gone on the train. He could probably done more work on the train because it was quieter. But of course, that's where the plebs go. I mean, he may be a fairly nicer, more decent well-intentioned kind of guy. But as Deborah's pointed out, he can never hope to understand and know what not having enough money means, because to him it's a spreadsheet and it's a column that has got negative numbers in. But he's never been at the till having to put something back on the shelf because he's 18 pence short, is he? Ever.
Well, we've seen it. We've seen the kind of gaffes that he's made with that, of, you know, putting his contactless card not on a card machine but up to the scanner. Just,
reader.
you know, and we saw Ben Elton, the comedian, yesterday on Laura Kuenssberg's show, sort of saying, you know, I wanted to have him, that he was different, that he wasn't this sort of kind of, you know, liar, clown-like figure like Boris Johnson. But he said, you know, he's come to the conclusion, like everyone else, that he is, and I use his words, a narcissistic sociopath who is kind of just, you know, on this line of power. You know, him and his wife are worth 529 million, and he stands there and he says in this robotic speech, I get it, I'm there for you, hold your nerve, I know it's tough. And people are starting to see through that. No, you don't. Actually, things are getting continually worse for us. How can we possibly believe that things are going to get better now when you've been saying it for months, and nothing has changed? You know, this week we're finally going to get the NHS workforce plan. And you know, people in the NHS for months and months and months have been saying the key problem with NHS, with pay, with all the issues there with the crisis, is retention. We need to bring up pay so people stop quitting. And so far, what we've got from the NHS workforce, nothing to do with pay, nothing to do with retention. We're going to double medical places, valid, and we need that to happen as well. But with the back door open and nurses and doctors flooding out, it's not going to fix it. And that's the same thing, not listening to people, not engaging with the actual issues, like you say, spreadsheets in the office, and the problems just keep continuing.
Yeah, well, it's not his mum and dad in the queue at the NHS for that, you know, outpatient appointment for this, that, the other, is it? His will go to Harley Street, and that's that. Leslie says, why do they keep lying to us? They tell us that technically we're not in a recession. If that were true, why do we have a cost of living crisis? It feels like a recession. I think it's fair. They're talking about repossessions and mortgages being unaffordable and people aren't able to eat and feed their families. Then that feels a lot like a recession, generally, to me. Kath says, good morning. Morning, Kath. Rishi Sunak on Kuenssberg. Dear me, this was a man who we saw deliver a speech to his fellow Tories in Royal Tunbridge Wells, telling them he'd redirected funds from poor areas Labour had helped to them. We saw then what he was up to. It's true. As someone who lives not far from Tunbridge Wells, I will tell you there is poverty around here. And there are areas of concern, especially even in the borough of Tunbridge Wells, but nowhere near as bad as in some other parts of the country. So what we've got here, and that's one thing we should worth quoting, I think, what Ben Elton said. So he said that he thought he called this an Orwellian, meaningless, evasive word salad, which is about right. And then says that he is just as much of a mendacious, narcissistic sociopath as Boris Johnson was. How is Sunak regarded in Westminster? Because they're the ones who put him where he is, the backbenchers, the Tories. He's more professional and harder working. Number 10's harder working and burning the midnight oil actually at work rather than partying than they were under Johnson. But there's still very little legislation coming through Parliament, isn't there? They're still going home at 4:30 some days. There's still nothing but sort of promises and no real delivery.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of this thing where we have, you know, who is Rishi Sunak? What does he properly stand for? For so long, and still now, especially with having Boris Johnson in the news so much, he has been a welcome, not Boris. That doesn't actually mean anything to be not someone else. You know, I think people in Westminster, from when I've spoken to Tory MPs, and they often say, you know, we can even see through him. There's this robotic sense to him, where it feels like he's learned a script. And yes, he's very good. He knows his stats, you know, he can come off with the sound bites very quickly, but it kind of feels quite emotionless. There's not that passion and that connection, you know. As I mentioned, seeing him at speeches before, it kind of speaks to this sense of him smiling through. You know, I went to one before and he was speaking to a room full of NHS workers, and any time they'd answer a question, he would smile at them and be like, you know, before I even answer, I just want to thank you because you are doing the best job ever. And there's a sense of patronization where you're telling me that, but yet in the next breath, you're not willing to raise my pay at all. You're not engaging with the fact that of what the cost of living crisis actually means for people. You know, My colleague Lizzie Buchan today had a paper a story in the paper, which was talking about 1.7 million children being in households where they're struggling to buy food and they don't have proper food security. We've seen huge figures around hygiene poverty as well. Children having to wash with washing up liquid. They're not being able to brush their teeth with toothpaste, and we never see that kind of emotional sense of Rishi Sunak actually saying things. And Tory MPs see that too. They don't think it's completely over. That it's still a while until a general election in some ways, so that they're, to use a quote, holding their nerve to see whether the Tories will get in. But there's not a huge amount of confidence, I don't think, in Rishi Sunak.
No, I think they're just waiting to see how many they can get on the lifeboats. That's what his job's there for, really. He's not Boris Johnson. He's not Liz Truss. Marion says, I think Sunak's been taking acting lessons. It's all a pantomime. What do you think, everybody? How do you think Sunak's doing? Are we being unfair? He's only been in the job 5 minutes. Is he allowed to have a bit of teething trouble? It's not his fault the economy's in the state it's in. Well, he was Chancellor for a bit, wasn't he? But it's Liz Truss, isn't it, really? Is it perhaps, we should all be a bit more tolerant and forgiving of him? He knows how to make himself rich. Maybe that would work for us. Marion goes on to say, sack Helen Whately. I just watched her on GMTV. She's totally useless and has no fight. We need someone who can genuinely, loudly and effectively argue for the NHS, not a limp lettuce. They do seem to think, don't they, Sophie, that the NHS is a cost. They look at it as a spreadsheet, look at the total amount of money that it costs and go, well, that's just too much. But they never see, because it's not on a spreadsheet and you can't account for it in the same way, the pluses of everyone living longer and everyone having the screening and everyone getting the treatment and everyone having healthy births and things like this. They don't see the social, the economic benefits you get out of the NHS. It's just a cost to them.
Yeah, totally. It's that short-term vision that we see across every part of politics, be it education, be it health. We can look at things, say, like obesity. Like the obesity strategy sort of commitments have been dropped time and time again. We had Boris Johnson briefly bring them back, kind of more of a personal motive when he was very sick with COVID and decided to sort of bring back obesity on the political agenda. But obesity is a huge risk factor for so many different other diseases, be it heart disease, be it diabetes, and actually focusing and doing something on obesity will help the NHS in general. That's why we'll be very interested to see that long-term workforce plan later this week. How long-term will it actually be? As I mentioned before, if retention's not in there, we're not fully thinking about the success of the NHS. Again, that short-term vision of saying, well, COVID's had a knock-on effect. There's nothing really we can do. Everyone's got knock-on effects around the world. Oh, well, actually, no, they haven't. We've got a much worse situation here in many different aspects, which, again, Rishi Sunak doesn't want to face up to, doesn't want to look in the long term. And that's politicians looking for tick boxes. What did I do during my short tenure as Prime Minister? What kind of achievements will be at the top of my Wikipedia page that I can shout and win about, rather than what is actually right for the public? Have some integrity, like you said you would, and care about the British people for once.
Yeah. Now, Richard says he's no better than Johnson. He's still using lies when replying to questions. I do tend to think, Sophie, that if he went to these events and just said, look, I know I'm disgustingly rich compared to everybody else here, and I did fly in on a helicopter, and no, I don't know what it's like to only have one loaf of bread that's white sliced to get through the week, but I do know how to make money, so we need to do this, this, and this, and then we'll get there. Just be honest with people. Don't pretending that I get it. I'm 100% with you guys. It's sincere.
Exactly.
It doesn't work. So when he gets through this sort of short-term blip, he's insisting all this is the economic crisis. He's going to face with a general election in very short order next year, probably, which he said he doesn't mind if he's the least popular person on the ballot paper. He's literally just said that. I don't mind being unpopular next year. Perhaps that is him being really honest. He doesn't want to be in the job for the difficult bit, which is actually hauling the country out of it. He'd far rather that was Labour's problem, wouldn't he, really?
Yeah, I think so, totally. And, that doesn't give much confidence to people in the Tory party or Tory supporters when you've got the leader of your party is actually saying, I don't mind being unpopular. You should want to be popular. You should want to be doing things that are actually helping the British public. We kind of got this with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng that's saying, we're going to do these things things, and it's risky, but we know what we're doing. We know what we're doing. We've got a vision. Just trust us, and it'll all work out in the end. But it clearly hasn't. And we're kind of getting the same sense with Rishi Sunak now, which is being, things are going to be okay. Just trust me. I know they're awful now, but they will be okay. But people don't want to hear that. Things are not okay right now. And Rishi Sunak just thinks that they'll get worse and worse. What is he waiting for? Is he waiting for more deaths, more excess deaths from poverty? People die from poverty. They die from starvation. Does he realize any of these things? I don't know what he's waiting for before he actually pulls his finger out and starts helping people who need the help now, not in some imaginary future down the line.
No, well, some imaginary future, maybe he gets his green card back and is cleared off anyway. Now, elsewhere in that page, sort of down in the bottom corner there, very quick before we go on to good news, it says that this is the thing about excess deaths. The UK has the second highest rate among 19 nations. We're 18th out of 19 nations for avoidable, preventable deaths, things like heart attacks and strokes that you can easily treat if you get to them in time. We're also fourth worst for preventable deaths from cancers, and we've got fewer MRI scanners than anyone else in that study. That's why I'm ready to be unpopular. And down in the bottom corner, everyone's dying. They don't have to die, but they're dying anyway, because this guy doesn't see the economic or social benefits of saving people from things that they could be saved from. They could go on to be tax-generating units for years to come if you fix their cancer. But no, they'll just die. Whatever, who cares? They're only poor. They haven't got a helicopter. Who cares?